Arnie Ball is out, Popper Ball is in. It's been a busy few days since we last spoke. Graham Arnold officially tendered his resignation as the coach of the Australian men's national team on Friday. James Johnson saying Football Australia would act quickly in bringing in a permanent replacement. That they did. On Monday, Tony Popovic was confirmed as the next Socceroos manager through to the end of the current World Cup cycle. We'll break down that appointment, Popper's opening presser, and reflect on Graham Arnold's tenure on this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast, supported by Manscaped. Use code ROUNDBALL for 20% off and free shipping at checkout. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Christian Montegan. Christian, it has been quite a busy few days, definitely in the national team world.
Do we ever have an off day where there's just no news and we can relax a bit? Because the whole off season, we've just had news coming through thick and fast. But yeah, this is another one with the new national team head coach appointment. And yeah, definitely a lot to dissect.
Ross Papadakis, hello to you. Of course, there were some Australia Cup semi-finals on the weekend as well. We're not going to have a whole lot of time to get to those tonight. We'll touch on them in more detail on Friday's episode. But yeah, a whole lot going on.
There's a whole lot going on. Yeah, hopefully we touch on the semi-finals later in the week, but should be good. Looking forward to some Tony chat today. So
yeah, and Poletti as well. Hello to you. It's always that Friday news cycle that catches up off guard. We record on Thursday nights. We get the episode out Friday, and I'm relaxed. I'm all happy, thinking another week, another podcast set is out, and then they drop the news that Graham Arnold is gone, and we miss the news for the next few days.
Yeah, it's always a big problem with the Friday news drop. I mean, I often say and lament to anyone who'll listen that, like, I just want one day in Australian football when nothing happens. Just one day. That's all I want. And it can't even get that. Like, just always something going on. But yeah, Tony Popovic. I have to see what he does.
We will. So, Christian, this all happened very, very quickly, as we know. We believe Graham Arnold tendered his resignation sometime early last week. That was obviously presented to the board of Football Australia. They accepted that resignation and they announced it publicly last Friday. It's been very clear to see through James Johnson's dealing of this situation, but also Tony Gustafsson with the Matildas, Football Australia as an organisation are very prepared for these scenarios where their coaches do depart them. They've clearly done a fair bit of regular succession planning, so they knew who the names that were available for the job and perhaps interested, and they knew who weren't available, and that is what allowed them to move so quickly. Obviously, Tony Popovic being a free agent, they would have been monitoring him and knowing his situation, so there really wasn't many barriers to entry when they knew who was and wasn't available.
Well, James Johnson said during the press conference that the discussion started with Popper early last week, but I believe, personally, they would have definitely done their homework earlier before that. They might have gone in touch with Popper and a few other managers beforehand, because I don't believe that Graham Arnold would have just come out of the blue and said, this isn't for me. I'm sure the FA would have had, something in the back of the mind to say, okay, this might be a possibility that Arnold might step out the door. I don't think Arnold's the type of person to spring that surprise on them. So, no, credit to the FA. Extremely well organised. They've done this appointment smoothly with 3 weeks to go until the next international window. They promised that last week. They said that there won't be an interim manager. We'll get a full-time coach for the Socceroos, and they've delivered on that promise. So no fault there. But yeah, on social media, there's been a bit of backlash around the appointment of Popovic. Obviously last season, a few fans calling for his head, saying they weren't exactly pleased with the style of football being presented on the park, which in parts I can definitely agree with there. But at the end of the day, he got victory to a grand final, just minutes away from clinching a championship. And this is still a coach who is a proven winner, right? He had that successful stint with the Wanderers, AFC Champions League winner, AFC Coach of the Year. He's won a couple of other minor premierships, I believe, in the A-League. So he is a proven winner. And I think this international window coming up and the next few in World Cup qualifying is so important, because it's not necessarily about playing the best football. It's about getting the results. Because I say that because Australia always seems to struggle to qualify automatically. And Popovic mentioned that during his press conference in one of the questions he got asked. And I don't believe it's going to be, the slickest, stylish football pleasing to the eye during these qualifiers. He'll just want to get the job done, Popovic. And I think he is the right man for this moment to do that. The contract runs until the end of the Men's World Cup in 2026. Whether the FA sees enough potential in his coaching ability to say, okay, we're impressed with you, we're going to extend this deal for longer, who knows, until maybe the 2030 World Cup. And then maybe Popovic will have a bit more time to perhaps implement a more, free-flowing attacking brand of football. But as you rightly mentioned again in the press conference, he's not going to have much time with his squad to delve into a plan, work with them day in, day out, like he would at club level. So this is a whole new experience for him, and it could take a bit of time for him. But at the same time, this environment might suit him, right? Because you get people saying, oh, well, international football is different to club football, so he's not going to adapt well. But it could be the complete opposite. He might well thrive in this environment where he's under less scrutiny in terms of media, having to, face the media each day, like you would at an A-League club, for example. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered. But, for the meantime, I think the FA didn't really have much of a choice in terms of candidates, to be honest. But Popovic, I don't mind it. I think he can definitely take Australia at least to that third and fourth spot, maybe sneak into second. But yeah, we'll wait and see.
It's interesting, this conversation between the differences of club football and international football is a very big discussion point here, because he's been criticised in the past, and we know his record in A-League Grand Finals. He's been in 5, lost 0, but he's been able to coach teams through very dominant regular seasons. He, won the premiership with the Wanderers in their inaugural year. Apart from the year in the middle with victory, he was high up on the table. So he's been able to create really strong defensive teams that succeed over the long term over a course of a league, but perhaps has failed in those knockout bracket kind of settings, which ironically is what Graham Arnold was really praised for, is that he wasn't able, in the third phase of World Cup qualification, hasn't been able to string all these results together in kind of the league phase. But once he got to the World Cup, it became much kind of, I don't want to say less about the tactics, but it does feel like that way. And the focus instead shifts onto just getting the best out of the group that you have, and those motivational techniques and whatever can be used to bring the group together. I think most people will agree is largely what took the Socceroos through the groups and into the round of 16 of the World Cup. So Ross, this kind of criticism of Tony Popovic that came towards the back of the A-League season perhaps exhibits a few characteristics that actually means he might suit international football better.
I think so. I agree with everything Christian said about like this could be the environment that Tony Popovic strives in, which could be the case. We've seen issues in the past with man management, recruitment, all of this stuff, and it's if he's got his players, then maybe Tony Popovic will play a different style of football that he usually does at club level. So Tony Popovic, we'll see how he goes. I mean, yeah, look, he's got China and then he's got Japan. So he's got a couple tough fixtures coming up. So I'm curious to see how he plays.
Poletti, what do you make of that difference between the domestic game and the international game? You were at the press conference on Monday. He kind of didn't want to talk too much about the style of play and what he sees bringing forward to the Socceroos. But again, that difference between club football and international football, I think, is a big talking point.
I mean, it absolutely has to be a talking point. But at the same time, I also understand why he didn't want to talk about it. And he said as much in his press conference when I asked him, what sort of style and tactics can we expect? And he essentially said, look, I don't think now's the right time to talk about it because he hasn't even had a look, at who's available yet, who's not available. He said he's only just watched the Bahrain and the Indonesia game. So he's very much coming into this with a fresh set of eyes. I'm sure he knows what sort of players are likely to be available. The likes of Nestoria and Kunda, Matt Ryan, all the usual sort of suspects, right? That have made up the bulk of the Socceroos squad, for the last few years under Arnie. So it's not like he'll be coming into this with a completely clean slate, but like he knows that he has the ability to implement changes that he wants to implement. but he also doesn't necessarily have the time to get into the deep tactical nuance that he usually would like at a club level, which is what makes him so successful at club level. So it's a fascinating change, but he's ready for this. He wants this job. He knows what it entails, and he's very much excited by the prospect. And I think it's a breath of fresh air in Australian football that we haven't had for a while, and we'll get on to that a little bit later when we talk about Arnie and his departure.
Christian, we talked a little bit about potential options to replace Graham Arnold if he were to leave. Obviously, that's come true. I think you and I both had Kevin Muscat at the top of our list. We learnt quite quickly after they announced Graham Arnold's departure that Muscat wouldn't be available. He's obviously doing quite well in China. Most people are tipping him for a move to Europe in the next year or two. Taking the national team gig at this point in his career would send that path in a different direction. John Aloisi was also rumoured as one of the tipped coaches to take over. But if you look at the list that were probably realistic and available, Tony Popovic was, of course, a free agent. He's part of the Socceroos, history. He's the first member of that golden generation to now be appointed as head coach. He's played through all the junior teams. He knows the Socceroos system. He knows what's required to do well in international football and in Asia. Considering all of those different factors, it seems like quite a reasonable appointment, I think is the word I'd use from FA.
Yeah, and you could probably argue the same case for John Aloisi in the sense that, proven soccer, he knows the environment, but the only difference is that Popovic is proven in Asia, where he's done well with the Wanderers, obviously in the Champions League. He knows the Asian environment just that bit better. He's got that tad extra experience at managerial level. And yeah, I just think this definitely makes a whole lot of sense in terms of the candidates who are out there, because you and I, Lockie, and a few others here agreed that Muscat was probably our number one candidate for the job, but obviously he wasn't interested yet. And Popovic said during the press conference, even 2 to 3 years ago, he wasn't ready for this job. He admitted that, but now he's ready. He's ready to tackle on the challenge that lies ahead of him. He says it's the ultimate challenge. So whether he lives up to the billing, obviously we'll have to wait and see. But I just wanted to quickly touch back on Poletti and the style of play aspect, because there was a particular question that caught my eye. So he was asked about being pragmatic versus playing entertaining football to get the Australian public on his side. And this is what he said. He said, "I think if you win, the public is on board. When you win, there will always be the discussion of how we can do it better. And that's a good discussion. It's the right discussion, but we need to win. Australia needs to be qualifying for World Cups." Then he goes on to say, "It's always okay to win ugly. That's not to say you're planning to play that way. I'll never be satisfied when we win and don't play well. We'll be satisfied with the win, but we need to make sure the style gets better." And so, then after he brought up the Socceroos qualifying for 2 World Cups out of the last 5 automatically, then he said, if you have that expectation of good playing style, great, keep asking the question. But you should also have an expectation of winning. So I thought that was a really important piece of what, was a great interview, all that as well, because, what Pop explained there, it says to me that we shouldn't expect the most stylish football, at least early on, which is what I touched on before. And he sort of waltzed around it in a very smart way, because he's mentioned it's good to win ugly, but at the same time, he's basically implied that he isn't planning on planning that way. So yeah, he's giving himself a bit of, wiggle room for when the performances perhaps aren't so pleasing on the eye, especially in those first few games of qualifying. He's already provided his explanation covering both sides and hasn't given a definitive answer.
Ross, a lot of people, including us throughout many times last season, were arguing that exact methodology was holding Melbourne Victory back in a certain way, that perhaps that strict adherence to wanting to win every single game wasn't leaving enough room for the team to develop. Do you think that dynamic plays out any differently compared to Victory and the Socceroos?
I think the Melbourne Victory job is a very difficult job, just based off the fan base, based off the history of the football club, which is a bit unfortunate for him because he did well considering, bar that one season. But soccer is just he knows the players. He's played in World Cup qualifiers. He's played in an OFC Nations Cup. He's played in Asia himself. I think if he has the players and if he wins games, I'm gonna support the guy. Like, let's be real. We didn't like Graham Arnold at the start, and then he adapted over time, and then we came to love Arnie Ball, and now Popper's just got to do what he has to do to win over the fans.
Is it as simple as that, Poletti? Win and you'll be accepted?
I think it's a lot easier in international football where we delve in such, we look at things in such small sample sizes that, it's 2 games in a window, it's 1 game in a window. Occasionally you get 3 games in a window, but for the most part, it's 2 games every window. And there's not really time to, like between windows, certainly, but in the window itself, there's not really that time to, go with a nuanced tactical breakdown for those who don't, breathe this sort of stuff day to day. And when I say breathe this stuff day to day, I mean members of the media, tacticians, all those sorts of things. For the general public, it's very much, we won, great, we're doing well, on to the next result. We won again, sweet. How good's this? 2 in a row, let's go. Australia's winning the World Cup, which is, and as much as that sounds, very, very blasé, that is
optimistic.
A general mentality. It is a general mentality of the Australian population and the way they look at it, Everyone thought the Matildas were winning the World Cup because, that they were smashing opposition left, right and centre in the World Cup, besides the Nigeria game. And we don't talk about the Nigeria game. It didn't happen. But, the general sentiment was, we're winning the World Cup. It's going to be massive. And then we get beaten by England. And suddenly it's over. So I very much think, from a general public perspective, to answer your question, yes, win and you'll be accepted, which is something that doesn't necessarily have the chance to happen in club football, because you're seeing the side play every single week in, week out. And with the Australian sporting public the way they are, where we know that the crowds increase when teams are winning because people want to support a winning team. A lot of them don't want to sit in the stands week in, week out, watch 1-1 draws, watch your side lose 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, even 1-0 sometimes. If you're getting a 1-0 result either way every single week, for a lot of the public, they've got better things to do with their 2.5, 3 hours when you can in travel time. But if you know that you're going to get exciting, entertaining football that may end 1-0 or could end 4-3, 3-2, 5-4, then you're going to want to turn up in a club level every week. But international football, because it's so few and far between, Adelaide's getting its first game since Ange Postecoglou was coach of the Socceroos. And I will specify Socceroos, I've obviously had Matilda's games, but they're getting, their first men's national team football or senior men's national team football for the first time since Ange Postecoglou was coach. They're going to sell out regardless of who's playing, regardless of who the coach is. Graham Arnold could coach this side, continue, and the fans are still going to turn up because they don't get to see the Socceroos all that often. And, so I think, to answer your question in a very, very long roundabout way, yes.
It's tricky because I think there is factors going both ways to this. And I think you are right in the fact that because there's a big gap between games, the sample size is small, there's almost not enough time in a games to build that kind of performance level up. So you get a little bit of wriggle room on that side. But when you go every week, you're playing in the league at club level, you are competing for something. There is a trophy at the end of the line. In the A-League, you qualify for finals and you go to the final series, you try and win the championship, and there's the premiership for the regular season. But when you're playing international football, majority of your games are either friendlies or there are qualifiers for a major tournament. So when you're playing, you're not necessarily playing to win something. You're playing to improve the performance between every game and get your team better and then qualify them so you're ready to win the major tournament. So Christian, even if you win a game 2-0, in a qualifier, but you play badly, a lot of times people don't give you credit for the 2-0 win because it's about the performance and building up the performance. So when you get to the major tournament, you can win those games. So it becomes even harder in that sense.
Yeah, you're right in that sense. But in the press conference, I heard Popovic say he doesn't really care about the outside noise. He doesn't read too much into it. And he said, I'm completely honest. I don't read into what people say because I believe in the process and what I do with my squad. And I do believe him in that sense because he's one of those coaches who instills that mentality and that mindset to his playing group that they want to play for him. And that's, again, a real advantage to why I think the FA brought Popovic on board to coach this team. Because you look at the squad in the last few games that they've played, they've just lacked that urgency, the energy. And I think Popovic can give him, a real kick up the backside. And he can instill that mentality, like I said, to, I guess, change how they approach games. And like you said, Lockie, they may not be, winning something in qualifying, but they should be thinking qualifying should be one of the goals or, in terms of a small trophy to then go on to bigger things in the World Cup and try and achieve something bigger. So I think he's definitely the right coach in that aspect. But like we've touched on before, international football, it's strange. It's very obviously different to club football. It's how you adapt. He said it himself. He has to make every single training session count. His scouting network, it's going to be completely different. He's going to have to be, all over it across the board in Europe, domestically, Asia. So it's going to be a massive job for him. I'm confident that he can do it. He's got the experience. He's admitted that he's ready for the job, and we'll see how it pans out.
Ross, another one of the quotes from the press conference, we should be aiming for that top spot to go through automatically. Only 1 point from the first 2 games. Yes, 8 games to go, but we have tough games against Japan and Saudi Arabia to come. That's quite an expectation he's placing on himself.
It is. Top spots. I would be lucky to go through third, even, to be honest. We have to get a result against Japan and Saudi Arabia to even come anywhere near top spot. So even China, if we don't get a result against China, then we're not looking good for this round of qualifiers. But look, he'll back himself as well. He backed himself when he came to victory. And then, I guess we cross China and Japan and reassess the situation from there. I don't think these next couple of the 2 games coming up and then the 2 games after that is a good judgment for him based off for the future of his Socceroos career, I guess you can say. But he's got time to work with the squad in between, I guess. So we'll see what happens.
I think any coach is going to say that, though.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to back yourself.
The good news is that China are incredibly beatable at the moment, even for a Socceroos lineup that's in transition, essentially. They lost 7-0 to Japan and 2-1 to Saudi Arabia in the first window of this qualification cycle. Indonesia only had the 2 draws. Pending other results, we get a win on match day 3. We could jump as high as third. Possibly 4 if you can build up the goal difference a little bit, pending other results. I don't expect Saudi Arabia to drop many points. So you say third and then get a result against Japan and, suddenly you're sitting back third on the table and you've got a game against Saudi Arabia. In the November window, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if that Saudi Arabia game, one of the 2 Saudi Arabia games, I should say, settles the group, in terms of who finishes second to Japan, because Japan just look a world and away above everyone else, and getting a point off them is going to be.
I would have loved for the
key.
Japan game. I would have loved for the Japan game to be the next one up instead of the China one, because you always see that response from a team, and that next game, I think, not to say that we would have gotten a point, but it could be, the same for the 4th game after the China one. We could see a response, and that could give Australia a bit of motivation and a confidence booster heading into that game. But the Japan one away from home was never expected to, get anything from that. I think a draw would be a terrific result, considering the circumstances and a new coach coming in. So we shouldn't judge Popovic too early. We must stress over these next 2 games. This is over the whole qualifying process. After the 10 games or the 8 games are complete, then that's when we really have to, analyze how he's gone about it, and then we really make a judgment from there.
Well, it's the new manager bounce, right? So conceivably, you might think that a result against China is a done deal. The Japan game, I think, is a lot more gettable under Popovic than it would have been under Arnie. Not necessarily for a win, but to get a result. And I'll explain my logic here. One of the things that we often see at club level, and it goes back to that new manager bounce, is sometimes all you need is a new voice in the locker room, right? All you need is to hear a new voice, even if it's the same tactics, same systems, same 4-4-2 up the middle. Thanks for coming. Sometimes all you need is just that new voice to go for it. And so I think that's what Popovic can do. Like, we know he likes to set his teams up very defensively. They like to play, possession-based football. He sometimes struggles to get the best out of his midfielders and his strikers. So essentially, it's Graham Arnold, but with a new coat of paint. But I think having a slightly different person looking at it, we are, like Graham Arnold and Tony Popovic both see football very, very differently, regardless of how they set their sides up. I think it could be the same formation, same system, same players, but I think there's a better chance of getting a result simply because you've got that new voice in your ear. Before you move on, Lockie, the one point I did want to touch on is, and this was a big criticism of Tony Gustafsson while he was coach of the Matildas, is Tony Popovic said that he's going to base himself in Australia, which Gustafsson didn't. He chose to very much delegate that role to his assistants. So Tony Popovic is going to be based in Australia as the national team coach, which I think is absolutely fantastic because it means he'll get to see one-on-one every single week he can go sit in the stands and watch a game rather than watching it on television or on any sort of camera, VO or whatever they have set up to give you that wide angle pitch, because you see things a lot differently when you're in person. And I know a lot of our top players are playing in Europe, but it's also, you can also get on a plane and go watch them. But having a look at not just the talent in the A-Leagues that's more than set up and ready to take on Socceroos spots, but also being able to see the next generation coming through. And he did indicate that he's not going to look too heavy into the Ollie Roos or the underage setups, now, because his focus is on this window. But there's a long time between November and March. That's 4 months. There's a lot of things that you can do in real world time when you look at those sorts of things. And so being based in Australia, I think is going to be a welcome change. So that's not to say that Arnie didn't, but I think it's going to be good to see another coach base themselves in Australia.
Yeah, for sure. I want to jump back on the tactical point because, Christian, I think there are a lot of similarities in the way that a Graham Arnold and a Tony Popovic team will likely set up. But what we do see when a new manager enters any kind of team is often a shake-up in preferred personnel. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticisms of Arnie's. I mean, there's criticisms of every national team's coach's selection. But, there's been a few players that have maybe consistently been left out of Socceroos squads for one reason or another. Do you expect much of a shake-up, even in just the early days? Maybe he chooses to keep it quite consistent, but maybe, as Poletti says, after that November window, maybe then branch out a little bit more?
I think personally he'll stay consistent. I don't think he'll change it up too much. One of the players who I feel as though should have probably gotten a bit more game time, a bit of a look in, is Daniel Ozani, and Popovic worked with him last season in the victory, and he's a player who knows inside out, worked with him for a year or so. So that's one player definitely. Then obviously another example, we got Chikati started the last 2 games, but he's been playing right back. So obviously Popovic being a centre back himself in his playing days, does he see Chikati as more of a centre back, and then does he drop either Rouse or Sutar to the bench? So that's another dilemma there. But for the meantime, for these next few games, I don't expect too many changes. Like Poletti said, he'll have heaps of time to focus on the youth and bring up new players and integrating them into the squad. But for now, it's just about winning and getting that result because, make no mistake, we shouldn't judge him early, but he's still under pressure to get results because, you don't pick up at least 2 wins in these next 2 windows, and it's obviously not looking too good. So that's his main focus first of all, and then after that, after the November window, he can start to look to freshen it up a bit. And also, he mentioned that he's not going to rely on the advice on Graham Arnold. I'm not too sure if that's true or not. Will he ring him up and say, okay, what's been happening? Can you give me any sort of advice? What's been happening? Because he hasn't got too much of a time frame until that China game. So I think that would probably be ideal. We're still yet to see if he's going to bring his own coaching staff in. That's new ideas there as well. So yeah, there's a lot to contemplate and gather, but I don't expect too many changes to begin with.
So Chikati is a ball playing 6, right?
I think, yeah. Look, I think every manager's got their favourites. We've seen that in the past with some Socceroos managers with like that. But look, he's also European. He's got that European pool potentially. So like the half Croatians, the half Bosnians are all gonna rock up. I'd love to see a Fran Karasic back in the mix, but we don't have a right back, so we need some business going on there.
We do. Ross, one more question before we rewind a little bit to Graham Arnold. What does success look like for Tony Popovic as Socceroos boss? He's got a contract to the end of this World Cup cycle, North America 2026. What does success look like for him when that contract is over?
I think it's tough. I think if he matches round of 16 or whatever, it's more teams in the World Cup now this time, isn't there? So it's kind of a bit different. I think if he makes it out of the group at this World Cup that he's been given, then I think that's a success based on the time that he's been given, and then we'll see, or I guess we'll cross the bridge when we get to it. But yeah, definitely qualify for the World Cup and then make it out of the group, you'd hope. But that's just me.
Well, I was just going to say, given that there's a round of 32 now before the round of 16, because the Socceroos got out at the round of 16 last time, is a pass mark getting a win in the knockout stages?
That's what I'm thinking.
I'd say there are plenty of people who, are setting their goals a bit lower than that at the moment.
Well, how low do you think the goals are going?
Qualify for the World Cup is success. I think that's what people are thinking from here.
Oh, no, but I meant if when we get to the World Cup, I think... sorry, I may have misunderstood the question. I think qualification is absolutely the goal, because it would be a disaster to not qualify for the World Cup, especially given it's 40-18 World Cup. Like, if we can't finish fourth in the group, if we can't finish fourth in the group to get to the fourth round of qualification, and that's a bare minimum. Ideally, you want to qualify direct, but if we can't finish fourth in a 16 group, what are we doing here?
The thing is, if we don't get great results the next few windows, we can almost rule out automatic qualification. Then you have to go through the annoying process of going through this next group stage and potential one-off games like we have done before, of course, successfully. But people forget how razor thin that margin was to being eliminated against the UAE and Peru and never even getting to that World Cup in the first place. So, Christian,
is that a blessing in disguise, so Lucky?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, as Tony mentioned this in his presser as well, sometimes results mask the performance a little bit and what's going on underneath. So, look, we'll always have the memory of the World Cup, and we're going to get to that in a second. Obviously, qualifying for the next World Cup should be the minimum standard, but I think people sitting here today asking what they want from this Tony Popovic performance, I think if you told them they would get to the World Cup, they would be satisfied by that.
Yeah, 100%. They'd accept that in a heartbeat. The way that things have gone in the past two games to open up the qualifying campaign, I think both of you guys touched on it perfectly. The goal is to qualify, but after that in the World Cup, it sort of depends though, because it depends who you get in the group, who do you play in the round of 32 if you get to that stage. So I think first and foremost, Australia just has to focus on qualifying, because Poletti said it would be an absolute disaster if that didn't eventuate. But at the same time, can you blame Popovic if that does occur? Because he wasn't there for the first two games. He wasn't there previously to set up his squad and the personnel and all of that stuff. So he's basically just been thrown in the deep end in a sense. And I think it'd be a tad harsh and unfair to criticise him fully if Australia didn't qualify for the World Cup, because I fully expect Australia to make third and fourth, but again, you touched on it, Lockie. It's razor thin, from there on in terms of, you might have to play someone intercontinental playoff, in Asia as well, those groups of three, you've got to finish top of the group. So yeah, there's a lot of factors and variables that go into it, but yeah, like I said, first and foremost, qualification, that's the main goal, and the Australian public will be more than satisfied with that outcome.
All right, let's rewind a little bit and talk about Graham Arnold. As when most coaching tenures end before they were expected to, there is a little bit of a sour note on his final few games as Socceroos head coach. But at the end of all of it, he does depart the Socceroos with the most internationals coached and one as coach for the men's national team. He was the first Australian-born coach to get more than one win at a World Cup. He set the world record for consecutive wins in World Cup qualifiers and led the Socceroos to their highest ever finish in the World Cup in Qatar 2022. Poletti, he said in his release upon departing, "I've made the decision to resign based on what's best for the nation, the players, and Football Australia." We saw in his post-match presser as well, after the game against Indonesia, his body language, he seemed dejected, he seemed checked out a little bit, he felt like he was just out of that energy to keep on pushing, keep on innovating. Perhaps you could say that at the end of the World Cup was the time to go, but it does feel again like he's made the best decision, as he says, for the team, the players, and the nation.
Yeah, I think he's definitely, as you said, put Australia first, put the Socceroos first. He basically came out and said, he struggled a bit since the Asian Cup loss. And he said he truly went to the Asian Cup thinking that we were going to win it. Direct quote from him. And he sort of struggled when they got knocked out and they didn't win it. And I think knowing that it's become increasingly clear the way things have gone over the last few windows, just the way he's addressed the media, his body language. The Indonesia game was a very stark sort of look in behind the scenes where, we all thought that when he said, "I need to go away and do some thinking," it's like, okay, do I need to get some new tactics? Do I need to get some new players? I think very few of us thought that walking away from his job was going to be one of those decisions that he needed to make. And then the rumbling started to come out that, oh no, Arnie could be on the way out. And it's like, well, that seems like a very stark departure from what we sort of expected. But at the same time, I don't think that this is a bad time for him to walk away. I think, would it have been better after the World Cup? Sure. But I mentioned this morning when we were having a chat, Lockie, was when you look at the way that international football breaks itself down, right? Like it could be, and Tony Gustafsson mentioned this October or November 22, that, there's, 9 months to the World Cup, but he only gets the players for training, for matches, for like 40 days of that, right? Like it's a 9-month period, but he only gets 40 days with them. And between World Cup 2022 and Asian Cup 2024, it was only 13 months real time. So that's not a lot of time to, necessarily bring in a new coach, to necessarily look at all these different tactical nuances while we're still trying to get through the second round of World Cup qualification, which the Socceroos usually breeze through with ease. But, you've still got to get through the second round of World Cup qualification in addition to getting, through the Asian Cup. And so I think when you look at it like that, probably wasn't the best time to bring in a new coach, but, the departure probably should have been after that. But, if Arnold was feeling what he was feeling, which he said he was, then that might have been the time to walk away. But I don't criticize him at all for staying through to the 2024 World Cup, given everything that's been going on behind the scenes. But this also isn't like it's not uncommon for coaches to see through one cycle and then end it, right? Like international football, it's very rare you get through to Didier Deschamps, who's coached France for like 12 years, the men's national team. That's a very much an outlier in men's international football. And so for Graham Arnold to go through 6 years as coach, I think it's very much an exception to the rule. And ultimately, the fact that he's left on his terms, even if it wasn't the way he wanted to go out, not many coaches get that opportunity.
And to bring back the theme of razor thin margins and results perhaps masking things a little bit, obviously we got through in that penalty shootout against Peru, but on the flip side, in the quarterfinal against the Asian Cup, Lewis Miller doesn't dive in for that tackle on Heung-min Son, and South Korea win a penalty, then Australia probably go through to the semi-final and have the softer side of the matchup and perhaps get to an Asian Cup final. If Song Hyun-min doesn't hit that free kick in extra time till we go to penalties and win it like that, like we have done many times before, it just shows, Ross, that, despite how much time, how much preparation, how much effort goes into football on a global scale, sometimes it really does come down to those fine margins, and that's what defines coaches and players at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think he deserved, just based on my own personal view, I think he deserved to coach us through the Asian Cup, and then I think he should have departed after that, not for his own, not because of the performance or anything. I just think he was mentally checked out at that point, and I think he was just doing us a favour, realistically. But look, in an alternate universe, we're sitting here today. Arnie's won us another Asian Cup, and we're starting this chat now about 2 wins from 2 in the World Cup qualifiers and looking good for the World Cup. So it's anything can happen, really. But look, I think he should have departed after that Asian Cup and just left with head held high and just, yeah.
I think, look, in football, especially for a coach and of a player as well, you have to have confidence in yourself. If you don't have your confidence in yourself, you don't back yourself in to go and win games, then you're never going to be successful. So I don't blame for Arnie for wanting to come around and have another go. I think it's incredibly courageous that after 2 games, he realised perhaps that the team was better without him. I think that's a very brave thing to do. Christian, let's rewind to the World Cup because, on paper, we finished, I think it was 11th place in the official standings. It was Australia's highest ever finish. We got out of the groups with some miraculous wins, amazing scenes of some fan sites here in Australia. It really caught the nation's attention. That game against Argentina, Garang Kuol in injury time, also close to equalising against Messi's Argentina, who went on to win the tournament as well. It's such a special moment. It'll go down in the history books of Australian football, and Graham Arnold was on the touchline for it.
And he was awarded coach of the tournament by L'Equipe, the popular French magazine. So that he admitted in that interview, Arnold, that was a pretty cool achievement that he was able to capture. And he deserves it because I think it was a pretty selfless act, let's be honest, to step aside, because he could have easily continued and said, okay, I'm the man for this job. I'm going to be the one who's going to turn things around. But no, instead, he thought what's best for the team was a new voice, a new coach, fresh ideas. So, that aside, he definitely deserves, a lot of respect, because although some people may not agree with his style of football, the way he went about his coaching, he did cop a lot of criticism even, before qualifying for that particular World Cup in Qatar. He was close to getting the sack at some points during the campaign. And then you've got to remember as well, he was battling through that COVID period where Australia hardly played any games at home. They had to travel, all over Asia. It weren't really settled in terms of the camp and the squad. So, I mean, to come through all that adversity and to perform as well as they did in the World Cup, what I remember most from that World Cup from an Australian perspective is how united the whole team was. And not just because the country got around them, I'm talking more within the squad. You can tell that everyone was playing for each other. They were, feeding off the energy from Arnold on the sideline and what he was feeding the information to the team. And you could just sense that watching from afar back in Australia. You could see that. And I think that's one of the main reasons why Australia did end up doing as well as they did. 2 back-to-back clean sheet wins. I mean, when have we ever said that before? Never. It was the first time that Australia had ever achieved that feat against Tunisia and Denmark in the group stage. And then, even that goal from Goodwin against France to open the scoring, it was just that that fight, that determination, that never say die attitude that we're so associated with the Socceroos. And then, you mentioned that Kuol chance right there. I didn't want you to bring that up, but I remember I was at Federation Square with my mates, and to see that ball not go in, that save from Martinez, heart just sank. But I guess it just summed up the highs and lows of not just that World Cup, but that whole qualification phase. And no, Arnold definitely deserves to go out with huge amount of respect, no matter what your opinion is of him. He's, such a great servant to Australian football. He's been involved in over 40 years. He definitely deserves to go out with a high and on his own terms.
And
I
Poletti-
think he should. I think Graham Arnold should really stay on as an advisory role type of what at Sir Alex Ferguson's doing at Man United with just sit there in the boardroom and just give advice to, I guess.
That's gone really well, isn't it?
I don't know how to explain that, but
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's necessary at a national team level. At a club level, sure, but there's all these processes and systems in place at a national team level, all that sort of stuff. And to be honest, Arnie just needs a break. He just I know we all laughed. Ante Milicic disappears off to Croatia for 2 years after he got burnt out from Australian football, and then he went and took the job with China. But he's been much better for it. I'm not saying Arnie needs to go to Croatia, but maybe he can go to Byron Bay or he can go down to the South Coast because he's an Aussie through and through, right? So just needs to go to an Australian holiday destination for 6 months, just chill out, and come back and coach. Whatever club side's looking for a coach. Maybe the Hearts job will still be open. That was one he was thrown around for after the World Cup, wasn't it? Was it the Hearts job or was it?
I think it was Hibs.
Rangers.
It was Hibs. Yes, it was Hibs. Yes,
Hibs.
And I think there was an MLS side that was in the rumored running for him as well.
There was lots. There was lots in the Middle East.
To be honest, he was
MLS
hot property. Yeah.
MLS will be in its off season. There'll be coaches getting the sack. Everyone knows that European clubs love a mid-season sacking. So there'll be plenty of jobs available for Arnie to take. So just go take a few months off, thank you for your service, and then jump back into whatever club is willing to pay you.
Maybe the next Hearts manager will be sacked by then, and that will be his opportunity to go in.
I mean, he knows how to work with Australian talent, right?
He does. That's very true. Maybe future Australian talent, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
It'll be on the Ancestry DNA payroll as well. Still,
which SPFL club has the most Scottish players with Australian heritage?
It probably is Hibs, right?
Yeah,
at least currently.
Yeah.
Christian, do you think we'll see him back in clubland? A serious question. Obviously, it won't be anytime soon. As Poletti says, I think he does need a break. But will we see him back in a club coaching role?
Obviously, it just depends on where his mindset at. I don't expect it in the meantime. A few months off, a year or two even, just to reset and refocus and just, bring everything into perspective. And then, from there, he can assess his options. I'm sure he would get club offers from whether it's Europe, Asia, even in Australia. There could be a couple of jobs lined up where there could be a potential vacancy where he can fill that void. And perhaps, coach in Australia again. So it just depends on what's out there, the market in that moment in time. But, I mean, if he takes a job right now, I don't think it'd be a good look on him to say that, I'm all burnt out and he jumps straight into coaching. So we can definitely rule that one out. It's just a matter of when's he ready to take that next step, when's he refreshed, and then he can go from there. But I'm sure definitely, in the next year or two, maybe he'll definitely jump back into it.
Ross, how will you remember Graham Arnold, Socceroos coach?
Probably how I remember him. Probably Matt Leckie's goal against Denmark. Just that's about it, really. I'm not too sure. I mean, I'm happy with I wasn't really going into the World Cup with a whole lot of expectations. So I think just the fact that we've played the World Cup champions and pretty much taken them to the end is, I think the legacy is going to leave on me personally. But I don't know about you guys.
Poletti?
Kiwis. That's banter, please. Just that one quote stands out for a press conference. Lockie doesn't remember it.
I got it now. I got it.
Yeah. Down in Canberra. That one stands out in my mind, honestly. But look, I just think, I think it's a serious answer. Looking at just the overall growth and development that Australian football had under Arnie, from an on-pitch perspective, the problems off the pitch have still persisted, and I think that made itself very evident today on social media. I saw one account tweet a photo of just someone kicking a can down the road, because that's how they feel about this appointment with Tony Popovic. And I can understand that point, but I think just on the pitch, just the development, the success that we had under Graham Arnold as a national team is something that needs to be remembered.
Yeah. Christian?
In terms of legacy, I mean, he's had 2 stints, hasn't he? He had one after Gus Hiddink at the 2006 World Cup, where he was there for a bit, and then obviously this second stint here. Obviously, it's the second spell with Australia that you're going to remember Arnold by, and it's I think back to that Peru penalty shootout. I know it might sound a bit cliche and a bit, obvious, but that was the real turning point for him, where if that goes the complete opposite way, then he wouldn't be coach of the Socceroos until after that game. He would have been sacked, and history would have been changed. Perhaps Popovic might have been, a candidate during that time, or Kevin Muscat, who knows? History could have been completely different. And he said in that interview, Arnold, that, if it wasn't for Redmayne's heroics, then he wouldn't be in the job, and that World Cup would never have happened. So I think in terms of legacy, that game and the emotion he showed after that, going through, like I touched on before, the adversity coming through the World Cup qualifiers with COVID, that showed his real character and personality and what it meant to represent Australia. And for that, I have so much respect for him. And that's the mark that he leaves for me personally.
Yep, well said. I agree with all that. That was very nicely put.
So just before we move on, Lockie, I do have one last question I wanted to ask the three of you as it relates to this. We just saw Tom Samani come back for a third stint with the Matildas. When does Graham Arnold come back for his third stint with the Socceroos?
I think he might be done.
I don't
Caretaker for 2 games. Caretaker just for a couple of games in like 10 years' time.
That's probably the only option. Lockie, what about you? What would be your legacy that you'd say for Arnold, for you?
I mean, people will laugh at this, but the Aussie DNA line has become so quotable, so memeable. It's the thing that always sticks in my head when people talk about Graham Arnold, and it has kind of got to that jokey kind of extreme. But that is the essence of what his Socceroos tenure will be. Christian, you just spoke really well about the adversity of that qualifying campaign. Everything was going against the Socceroos. They really shouldn't have qualified for that World Cup, but they did anyway, and it led to our best finish ever. And, we can complain about the tactics all day long, and we have done many times on this show. But it really was, again, I'm going to laugh as I say it, but it was the Aussie DNA, it was the Aussie spirits, and it was that togetherness as a group at that World Cup that carried us to that result. So that's what I'll remember Graham Arnold for. Now, just before we wrap up the show, obviously on this podcast, we like our balls round, but we also like them nice and tidy, which is why we have partnered with Manscaped. Manscaped were kind enough to send us some of their latest and greatest products and are also giving you, our audience, a 20% discount and free shipping if you use the code ROUNDBALL on their website at checkout. First up is your Roundball's new best friend, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra.
Now, Lockie, I haven't met anyone who isn't a fan of a trimmer, so say goodbye to your low pass completion percentage, and this trimmer gets it right the first time, cutting through the lowest of defensive blocks with style, without taking any unforeseen deflections. With 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish. And it's waterproof, just like a Route 1 Targetman hoofball setup. You can play the same system in the wet with no worries at all.
Sometimes, however, the lineup needs to be rotated to meet the challenges of different opposition, which is why the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra also contains the Weed Whacker 2.0. The Weed Whacker is a versatile option above the shoulders. It does some of its best work out in wide areas, taking on defenders 101 and eliminating those pesky ear hairs. But it also has the ability to weave inside and trim teams apart in central areas, floating in between the double pivot, and sniff out a chance on goal.
After a hard-fought game, recovery is important, which is why the Performance Package also comes with the anti-chafing Crop Preserver deodorant and Crop Soother aftershave lotion to ensure you're ready to go come the weekend. So if you want to join the 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped for all their grooming needs, then head online and use the code ROUNDBALL for 20% off. Thank you to Manscaped for supporting our show, and just know that by heading to the Manscaped website and using code ROUNDBALL, you're directly supporting our coverage of Australian football. All right, let's change pace a little bit. We're going to touch on this briefly and go into more detail on Friday. But the final of the Australia Cup is coming up. It's a big week for reasons nothing to do with the national team. This game was originally scheduled for the 5th of October. It got moved forward a week due to ground availability issues in Melbourne. So it is now on Sunday, the 29th of September. Of course, you got to juggle monster trucks at Amy Park. There's a concert on at Marvel. There's the AFL Grand Final on the 28th. There's the NRL Grand Final the weekend after in Sydney. So there's not a whole lot of great options. We settled with, I believe it's 7:10 p.m. at Amy Park on the Sunday. So that's what we have. We're going to deal with it. Obviously, it's Melbourne Victory versus Macarthur. Ross, you covered both of these games for Round Ball on the weekend. I'm going to limit you to perhaps 60 seconds each, and we can give you a longer slot next episode. But Melbourne Victory and Macarthur both 1-0 wins go through to the final.
They do, yeah. Neither side was very convincing in either performance, to be honest. Both managers weren't completely convinced with either of their team's performances, which is, I mean, again, that's the first A-League club Victory's played, and they kind of went toe-to-toe with Adelaide, and then Macarthur didn't really look convincing against Oakley and then against South Melbourne. So it's going to be an interesting game. It should be go to the end, I reckon. So
be a tight one. Let's focus on the teams that we're losing at this stage. Poletti, South Melbourne first. They're the final remaining NPL team in the Cup competition. They've had an incredible season. They won 2 trophies, the Doherty Cup, which is the State Victorian Cup, and the NPL Premiership. Just missed out on the championship in the grand final and got to the semi-finals of the Australia Cup. It's been a whirlwind of a year from them. They didn't do themselves a disservice at all. They were without their captain and leading goal scorer, Harry Sawyer. They pushed Macarthur all the way to the very end. It was a penalty for me. I think the referee got that one right. So Lucas Iglesias, unfortunate for him, Macarthur put away their penalty. But of course, the red card to Valencia Main is a big talking point as well that will impact the game next week.
If anyone thinks that wasn't a penalty, I have a pair of glasses you can borrow, okay? Because that was very clearly a penalty. It was clear as day. Like, it was just so blatantly obvious. And I want to know what was going through the defender's head, because it wasn't anything that needed to happen. Holman wasn't going to get to the ball. I think as a defender, you have to back yourself to cut off the inside lane and, maybe turn around, step back, leap up for a header, send it out for a corner, or just trust the keeper. Like, I don't think Holman was getting near it. And then Jermaine, as you said, picks up a red card. He's not going to be there for the final. I think the fact that we haven't seen Economides yet, who's not match fit, the fact that Macarthur don't necessarily have a striker that can play the way that Valencia Man does, in terms of his creativity, in terms of his ball playing, is definitely going to hurt Macarthur. I'd expect them to go probably some sort of 4-3-3 setup with a false 9, with that false 9 playing more as an attacking 10. Just so that there is someone centrally to service Jedru and Marin Yakalish. But overall, look, I think, Adelaide United, Jacob has been death riding them throughout this entire preseason. If you've read any of his pieces on the Adelaide United games, and they were able to defend well. It was a bit of a one-off strike from Jordi Valadon that sort of sealed it. He scored his first goal for the club. Not anyone you would have expected to come up with a winning goal, and I think, you always expect Valencia Man to come up with a winning goal for Macarthur, but just the way that game played out, as Ross said, they didn't look good against Oakley. They looked average at times here, and South Melbourne, they were without Harry Sawyer. They kept themselves in it, absolutely fantastically. But I raised this point a couple of weeks ago: is silverware just a step too far for Esteban Quintas? They lost the grand final 1-0 to Oakley. They've lost here, one game short of a final to Macarthur, who weren't at their best. Is that a concern for South Melbourne next season?
I don't think it's a concern. They won 2 out of 4.
Yeah.
I don't think how you're saying that's a bad thing.
Look, that was their 39th game this season, which is, I mean, I'm not too sure. Like, that's pretty much unheard of in Australian football. That's a full Premier League season for a semi-professional club, which is quite a lot of games. So I think emotionally and mentally and physically, the whole squad is just exhausted. And I know that after the game, their celebrations in the 1959 club were very just, everything was let go. There was a lot of emotion left out in the bar. So just from my personal standpoint, but yeah.
All right, Christian, finish us off with Adelaide United. Made the semi-finals. They played better in this game. They really did manage to stifle the victory at times, but it's Melbourne that go through.
Yeah, for me, this was never a foregone conclusion before kickoff because you never know what to expect in this rivalry. And historically, it's always super tightly contested between Adelaide and Victory. And it was clear that Adelaide were certainly up for this match. In terms of the tackles, the 50-50 balls won, they were really up for it. And there were times sporadically where Adelaide had their chances, particularly in the second half. But in the end, they just lacked that bit of quality in the end where Victory punished them with one of their better opportunities for the game, and that ultimately ended it. But for the way Jake has been, talking the whole season about Adelaide and not being so impressed with them, I was really impressed with how they handled themselves, because for some, this is going to be a whitewash. An absolute drubbing, and it wasn't. Adelaide kept it really respectable. They had a couple of good chances themselves to at least maybe even deserve a draw, perhaps. You could argue. So, yeah, at least that's a positive that Adelaide can take into the season. But, yeah, for them, there's going to have to be a lot of, rebuilding and planning ahead, because they're by far from the finished product under Calvitt.
And they had a lot of injuries as well going into the game. They had, I think, one centre-back fit,
that's right.
one striker fit. So they would just, if they've gone 1-0 against Victory, and Victory's supposedly in this amazing form, then credit to Adelaide when they get fit, they're looking good for the season, I think.
Yeah, and they had a lot of players unavailable on national team duty as well, the under-20s off at the moment, who will cover in more depth, as well as look forward to that Australia Cup final on Friday's episode, because plenty to talk about today, of course, with the Socceroos. But that will do for this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast. Thank you to Manscaped for supporting our show. You can use code Roundball for 20% off for free shipping at checkout. We'll be back on, what day will it be? Friday. I've said that so many times and I forgot it at the point where I really needed it. Christian, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Lockie.
Ross Papadakis.
Thank you.
And Poletti.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you then. Thank you all very much for listening at home. Goodbye.